Mr. Jivani goes to Washington, but what did he really accomplish? Hi, I'm Brian Lilly, and this is the Full Comment Podcast, and this week, we're talking to Conservative MP Jamil Jivani, who recently went to Washington. He, of course, has a well-known, long-standing friendship with U.S. Vice President JD Vance. He had a meeting with Vance. He was taken into the Oval Office to meet the president briefly. He also had meetings with Secretary of State Marco Rubio, U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer, and others. He said he was going down to put country over party. He was offering up his services to the Carney government, who rejected it. And in fact, well, when you look at the overall liberal reaction to Jivani's decision to go down to Washington and try and smooth things over for a trade deal, it seems that his visit irked them. Prime Minister Mark Carney was dismissive, saying it was nothing but a media stunt and Jivani doesn't have the right job.
We have extensive contacts with the U.S. administration, constant contacts with the U.S. administration. Minister LeBlanc gave a briefing to Mr. Jivani, who I don't believe is the trade critic for the opposition, certainly not the Minister of International Trade, nor the Prime Minister.
So what do you think he's going to do?
I think it might have something to do with all of you.
Industry Minister Melanie Joly said that, well, Jivani should be looking after his own riding and the fact that job losses have mounted at the General Motors plant.
As MP in charge of Oshawa constituents that are working at GM, that are losing their job, why is he just embracing the Trump administration that is putting tariffs on them and having them lose their job? And why is he basically not denouncing the U.S. auto tariffs? And that's just a question that across Oshawa people are asking.
Of course, he has spoken about those job losses, and he did offer to the Carney government to work with them, but they rejected it. And if you think that it didn't irk them, well, listen to Hamilton West Ancaster Dundas Liberal MP John Paul Danko in the House of Commons. He wasn't debating the issue of Canada-U.S. relations. He, in fact, was standing to debate the standing orders of the House of Commons, the rules that MPs play by, when he suddenly went off on a tangent about Canada-U.S. relations and Jivani himself.
Because there are very serious issues facing Canada at the moment, which have intensified since the last election. A U.S. hostile government, deliberate destruction of global allegiances and the stability that our country has relied on. We have a Conservative Party of Canada's own Unity Mitford, who is attempting to freelance negotiations with the American president right now.
Now, if you don't know, Unity Mitford was a British socialite who was enamored with Adolf Hitler, moved to Berlin, and tried to convince the Brits that they should join up with the Fuhrer. Well, Mr. Danko is calling Jamil Jivani a Nazi sympathizer, and by extension calling Donald Trump Adolf Hitler. Regardless of what you think of the U.S. president, he ain't Hitler. And finally, you had David Hurley, longtime Liberal strategist, campaign organizer, and manager, on the Curse of Politics podcast, making this comment about Jivani.
It's about him and his political future. Is this the show where we're supposed to tell the truth about politics? Is this we're supposed to tell the truth? He's too unattractive physically to be successful in politics. He's not going to be the leader of a political party.
Oh, I don't know if I'd agree with that. I don't know if his looks are. I'm not going to weigh in on
Which
that
part?
one,
that he's too unattractive, or that he is unattractive? I mean, you got to break this down, Fred. I know it's day one, but come on.
As soon as the election was over, he immediately put out a.
I can't believe you're going to dismiss this as not mattering. Of course, it matters.
I think he's well spoken, and I'm not ever going to say if a guy looks good or bad. I just can't do it.
I'd say that, well, Mr. Hurley needs to look in the mirror that he clearly owns but doesn't use. So, how does this all land? Well, you're not taking flack unless you're over the target. Let's talk to the man who went to Washington and get his reaction to all of this, Jamil Jivani. So, Jamil, how do you react to that? All of those liberals lining up to take shots at you. Clearly, you struck a nerve.
Well, I am trying to get something very serious done for our country. And I think it's, unfortunate that some of the responses have been trying to kind of drag this down in the mud. I mean, the reality is, we have a July 1st deadline to complete the review of CUSMA, a trade agreement that governs 3/4 of our exports. And I think that's pretty important. And I think it's entirely reasonable for every one of the 343 members of parliament that serve this country to do whatever they can to try to help avoid further economic issues in Canada. And I think I also conducted myself in a really respectful way. I mean, you can look and see, I've not been pointing fingers at the Prime Minister. I've not been criticizing him. In fact, I've been offering to work with him. The first person I met with when I came back to Ottawa on Monday was Minister Dominic LeBlanc. People can talk about national unity and working together. I think I'm living that. And I think it shouldn't be that hard for us to be able to work together. So I'm not gonna respond to any specific name calling or whatever. Like, I just want to get this done. I'm really just trying to be as pragmatic as possible here. I think that's what the country needs and deserves.
I remember years ago talking to your caucus colleague, Randy Hoback, a Conservative MP from Prince Albert area in Saskatchewan, and happened to run into Randy while I was in Washington. And we're talking, and he said that it always blows the minds of the Americans. This is about a decade or so ago. He said it blows the minds of the Americans when we show up in a multi-party setting. And at that point, he was talking about going down to Washington with Liberal MPs and you Democrat MPs. I'm not sure if Bloc MPs went. And this was during the Harper government. And they would go down as groups and go and meet with senators, members of the House of Representatives, members of the administration, and talk about issues. And, regardless of party in the Washington, D.C. side, they were always saying, we can't believe that you guys work together. We just fight. You were trying to work together. In fact, I think it was last November when you made the offer to the Carney government. How did that happen? And what was their reaction? Clearly, they did not take you up on the offer to work with you, although Minister LeBlanc took a briefing. But how did you approach that? And what did you say to them to try and say, hey, we can work together on this as Team Canada?
Well, I've made public comments, as you noted, offering to help with building relationships in Washington and trying to advance dialogue between the two countries. I made private efforts to have meetings with the Prime Minister and others. Those efforts did not go anywhere. And so I think, one of the things that I hope people reflect on before they, get too opinionated about what I've done and my trip last week is to just consider what would you have someone do, right? Like, if you have a member of parliament who has a direct line to the White House, should that member of parliament sit back and watch his own community lose jobs? Should that member of parliament sit back and watch as economic uncertainty cuts investment into our industries and our economy is going through a recession watch? Like, am I supposed to just sit back and watch? Is that what my voters showed up on election day for? I don't think so. I think they want action. So I made private efforts to talk. I made public offers to talk. They didn't go anywhere. And so I went down myself, and I went down not in any way to undermine the Prime Minister, but to encourage dialogue between the two sides. I then, after returning, had the chance to speak with Minister LeBlanc. As soon as he was willing, I took him up on the offer. We had a very good conversation. The ball is now in their court, what they want to do next. But I just, my view on this, Brian, really is if somebody wants to make a contribution to this country, is partisanship supposed to hold them back? I don't think so. I don't think that's what Canadians want. And that's not what I want. I signed up for this job to be of service, to be useful, to be relevant. And I am going to be those things. And I'm not going to wait for someone to give me permission to do that.
One of the things that I've heard mainly from keyboard warriors who don't know you, who don't know the situation, they're just convinced that you must have been acting rogue, that Conservative Party leader Pierre Poilievre could never have sanctioned this. Now, I asked Pierre about this back in December, and he said he was okay with it. But I'd like to hear from you. What was Mr. Poilievre's reaction when you went to him and said, hey, boss, I'd like to go help the PM?
Well, he knows that he's the one who set the direction for our party to be collaborative, especially at the turn of the new year. I think he really recognized the need for us to identify ways that we could help achieve things where the government and the Conservative Party both agree. And I think he, saw my offer and my actions completely within that direction. You're seeing in Ottawa right now, Brian, that the two parties are working through amendments and on a potential bail reform. You're seeing a lot more dialogue between the two sides. As a guy who's been championing the need for the government to do more for boys and young men, we're seeing the federal government now talking about a national strategy for men and boys and their health. So we're seeing more collaboration. And that is a direct result of Pierre Poilievre recognizing that this is important for the country right now. So I don't know why people would try to view this as some sort of friction between the two of us. I think everything I've said and done has been completely in line with the direction he's put forward for our party.
Now, you and I spoke about this trip before you went, when we saw each other at the Conservative Party convention in Calgary. Had a brief chat when you came back on the phone. From our private conversations, from your public statements, I've always taken it as you putting country before party. Talk to people who say, no, that's not it. It's just self-aggrandizement. This is your future leadership run. This is your personal ambition. What do you say to those people who are being skeptical? Because I take you at your at your word. And by the way, were you a Liberal MP doing this with a Conservative government? I would be the same. Like, we've got to take people at their word. But how do you convince those that are very skeptical?
Well, look, I'm not in the business of trying to persuade people who have bad faith criticisms, but I think some of the people you're describing do have good faith questions. And to those people, what I would say is, look, what I'm trying to do here is help a Liberal Prime Minister get a trade deal done. I am not trying to take credit for anything that I can't contribute. I'm trying to be a member of a team to accomplish an objective. And I don't believe that being a member of a team requires, as some recent floor crossings might suggest, abandoning your party, your voters, or your convictions. I can be a principled conservative and work with Liberals on things that we agree on. I think that should be a normal part of how Ottawa works. I don't believe that the people who vote for me expect me to be a potted plant sitting in a corner while the world goes by. And it's never been my personality either. Look me up. For better or for worse, I've never been willing to be a potted plant. And so this is who I am. This is a promise I made to my community when I asked them to vote for me, is that you were going to vote for someone who is of action and will make bold moves and do what he can to change things for the better. And that's what I've continued to do. So if people have good faith questions about why I'm doing this or what my intentions are, I will just say, let the actions speak for themselves. You don't even have to take me at my word. You will watch and see how things unfold in the coming weeks and the coming months. And I think that I will earn every bit of trust that I think I deserve.
So I think people would be shocked at how often members of parliament do work across party lines. Most people just see question period and they see the back and forth. What they don't see is at the end of question period, and this is regardless of who's in government, who's in opposition, members from the opposition walk across and talk to ministers and say, hey, I've got this file in my riding. Maybe it's an economic file. Maybe it's an immigration file. What can we do about it? And then you go off and you try and find solutions. That happens every day. People just don't see it. And to me, this is an extension of that. But let me turn now and ask you about JD Vance. Because before this trip, you didn't talk a lot about your friendship with JD Vance. People knew about it, but I think you were trying to keep that out of the limelight. We know that you're in a fantasy football league together. Came close to winning, but didn't. That probably still hurts.
Yeah.
But tell people about your connection with Vice President Vance. How did you meet, and are you still close?
Yeah, so we met 15 years ago at our law school orientation, and we became good friends very quickly because, in an environment like the law school we attended at Yale University, frankly, most people come from money. They come from well-educated families. Many of them are not even the first person from their family to go to an Ivy League school. But for JD and I, two guys raised by single moms, we had a very different cultural experience. So we stood out, in that environment. And I think we bonded over the fact that we were coming from a different place. A lot of things were new to us. A lot of it was uncomfortable, frankly. I had never seen wine that cost more than $9 or cheese that didn't come in a plastic wrapper before. So, it was just a different cultural experience. And so, we became friends, and, we went through a lot of formative experiences together, law school interviews and, summer internships. And, I was there when he met his now wife. I did the Bible reading at his wedding. It's a real friendship out of mutual respect for what both of us have overcome in our lives and the adversity that we've encountered. I can tell you that it is a weird thing when the guy that you drink beers with and play fantasy football with becomes the vice president of the United States.
I would imagine.
And so it has been an adjustment for us, because a friendship that really is just about family and football and, those kind of things, all of a sudden had politics injected into it in what felt like overnight. And, I don't talk about this very much, not because I want to, pretend I'm not his friend. I mean, you can find pictures of us together on the internet pretty easily. It's mostly just, I don't, didn't want to make our friendship about politics. He's part of a government that's doing their thing. If we had won the last election and I was in a position to reach out to him as a member of the governing party, I think that would have been easier and more straightforward. But after we lost, I thought it was important to let Carney and his cabinet build their own relationship with the Trump administration and figure out how they can work together. So I felt like enough time has passed. And, the reality, Brian, is like, there have not been substantive conversations between our government and the US government since the end of October. And watching that happen 3.5 months without, real dialogue, it just felt to me like, look, now is the time to say enough time has passed. Let's now reach out to JD and have that political conversation. And that's what going down there was about. It was about saying, look, like, I've not come to you about these issues before. I've tried to respect, Carney's unique responsibilities there, but I just want you to know, like, this is really important to my country, and we need to build some bridges here. We need to resume dialogue. We're getting closer to the July 1st deadline for CUSMA, and I don't want us to be inching toward that date with a huge question mark hanging above our heads of what's going to happen to our economy. So that's why I, kind of reached out to him and about politics, really for the first time, since I became a politician and he became a politician.
So let me ask you then, how did he respond to that? I'm guessing one of your first times or a few times seeing him since he became VP. Has that changed him? And what was the conversation like?
Yeah, I mean, I'll be respectful of not, disclosing too many things, but I mean,
Understandable,
he
but
greeted me like his friend, and we've been friends and we will continue to be friends. And he was very warm and gracious. I got to see his wife, the second lady, as well. We had lunch together. We caught up. And it was great to see him. Like, I'm really happy to see someone who I consider to be a good man and a good friend in a position like that. And I'm just, really happy for him and his family and their success. we had a good, it felt like catching up with an old buddy. And, that's nice that it hasn't changed him in a way where he's unrecognizable. He's still very much the same guy I remember going to law school with.
What's his view on Canada? Again, I know that you don't want to get too much into the weeds and betray confidences from private conversations, but I know that he has a view. Some say he's changed a lot since Hillbilly Elegy, his breakout book. Um, but, in looking at his public statements, his writings, he has a view that 20 years ago, 10 years ago, on economics would have been at odds with the Republican Party in the United States or the Conservative Party and the conservative movement in both countries. And that is a more protectionist view and a view to use protectionist measures to bring back manufacturing. Now, I can understand that. Whether I agree with it or not, I can understand the viewpoint. He comes from Ohio. He comes from an area that, Ohio, part of the Great Lakes Basin, used to be the manufacturing hub for the entire continent on both sides of the border. Does he get that the current trade standoff is hurting, his family, his cousins in Canada?
Well, so yeah, you asked kind of about his view. Well, I will say, when we were in law school, Prime Minister Stephen Harper was the Prime Minister of Canada, and I remember, we had lots of conversations where he, really admired Prime Minister Harper and still does, and thinks very highly of the job that Prime Minister Harper did for Canada. In terms of the protectionism and things like that, like, I think for them, it's really about rebuilding American towns and cities that have been in significant decline.
Like the one he grew up in.
Yes, like Middleton, Ohio, or Toledo, or Cleveland, or Detroit. A lot of places.
My hometown of Hamilton.
Yeah. A lot of places where, as globalization developed and manufacturing was offshored, it just really there was objective decline in the quality of life for hardworking people in those American towns, and I think they are focused on doing an economic strategy that they believe can help rebuild America. Now, of course, we as Canadians, Brian, we want to see that for Canada. We want to see places like Oshawa and Windsor and Hamilton and other places around the country that used to have vibrant manufacturing economies. We want to see them thrive too. And what I think our task is figuring out, how do we continue to have this special economic and security relationship with the United States where it's not a zero-sum game, right? Where one job in Toledo is not competing with one job in Hamilton. That is what we need to figure out how to do as two countries working together. And I do believe that there is a pathway to moving away from a zero-sum game where we understand that things like the value chain in auto, for example, mean that Canadian auto manufacturing actually supports job growth in states like Ohio or Michigan, as opposed to competing with job growth in those states. But that kind of mutual understanding only comes from being able to sit down and work together. And unfortunately, we're not at that stage yet between the two countries. But that's where I would like for us to be, because I would love to see a vision where Hamilton thrives and Toledo thrives and Detroit thrives and Oshawa thrives. Like, that is what a successful, strong North America looks like.
The view that was put to me a year ago, I was in Washington a year ago, I was speaking with Senator Kevin Cramer from North Dakota, a Republican, very close to the president, supportive generally of his agenda. But he was saying, look, we could move all the auto jobs out of Ontario into Michigan and Ohio tomorrow. We simply don't have the workers to fill those jobs. We would not be able to replace everything that's happening in Canada right now. Hopefully that gets through. There was a statement that I'll paraphrase from JD Vance, a statement that he made a while back. He said, in relation to his move from pure market economics to where he is now, he said, sure, we can get goods cheaper by importing them from China, but what good does that do if nobody has a job to be able to buy them? And that, I think, sums up kind of the mindset shift that's happened in Washington that I'm not sure our officials and our, elected and bureaucratic in Ottawa have figured out.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you're making a great point there, which is a lot of this is a worker-oriented approach to trade and economic development. And I do believe that that is an area where, Canadians and Americans overlap. I think we also, as Canadians, want a worker-oriented vision for the economy because we've seen how GDP can be going up while the quality of life goes down because affordability becomes a growing issue. We've seen that you can have this booming real estate economy while people can't afford a house. Like, we know that a worker-oriented approach to economics creates a different set of outcomes that are better for the average person. And I think that is what we need to embrace as well, not just as it relates to trade policy, but also when we talk about the need for these, major projects, big nation building projects, which frankly we haven't seen enough of, even though there's been a lot of talk about building things in Canada. One of the reasons building things in Canada is so important is because it does create meaningful opportunities for people. So yeah, that should be the center of economic policy, in my view, domestic and international. And I'd like to see our government embrace that as well.
We got to take a break in a moment, and after that, I'll ask you about Restore the North and you and Shiv Majumdar going on about liberal racism and early election and all of that. But first, before I leave JD Vance, does your friend have what it takes to replace Donald Trump? Is he going to be the nominee in 2028? Are you willing to prognosticate on that?
Yeah, look, if he hasn't made a decision on whether he wants to run yet. He's got a fourth child on the way. I'm sure he's got a lot to weigh with he and his wife. But I think if he decides to do it, I'm very confident he's going to win. I think he's incredibly talented, very hard worker, visionary. I think he understands where the world is going, and he is going to be a leader that can prepare his country for the future.
And one thing I'll say is, for all the Canadians saying, no, we can't possibly have that guy in, protectionist. If you haven't been paying attention to Washington, protectionism is a bipartisan issue now. And we've got to get used to it and figure out how to work it. All right, quick break now. And when we come back, we will talk to Jamil Jivani about the other people he met with in Washington, any progress he made, but also Restore the North, his push for helping young men in this country, and other issues. Back in moments.
There were so many missed opportunities to catch this before the devastating thing happened.
A third of them we found literally in the phone book. These people were not afraid. They knew that nobody was effectively hunting them. They knew they had escaped justice, that they were going to die in their beds.
When I give talks at law schools, is that the charter ultimately is empowering a minority, and it's empowering a minority that's a guild across the country. And it's a fairly elite guild, and the guild is lawyers.
Families who were split by referendum, and brothers and sisters who never talked to each other for years after the referendum because they were so angry at each other because of emotions on both sides.
The reason he was assassinated was not because he was trying to put a satellite into space, but because the gun that he was creating had other applications that made him and the gun very dangerous.
It's finally here. A new season of Canada Did What? Post-media podcast that revisits the big Canadian political events you might think you remember and tells you the real story you never knew. I'm Tristan Hopper. The voices you just heard are from our brand new Season 2. We will unpack some of the pivotal moments that helped define our country, often without a vote, usually without a plan, and sometimes without anyone admitting what they'd done. We'll find out how Canada became a welcoming paradise for untold numbers of Nazi war criminals after the Second World War. We let them build monuments to their wartime exploits and even ended up honoring a Nazi fighter in the House of Commons. And I'm sorry to say that none of that happened by accident. we'll bring you the little-known story of a troubled Canadian rocket scientist who turned to a sinister life of selling giant guns to terrible people. And if that sounds like a spy novel, it ends like one too. You'll hear the behind-the-scenes story of Quebec's attempted secession from Canada and how very close we came to a political crisis that would have made Brexit look like a picnic. You'll hear about how the much-celebrated Charter of Rights and Freedoms turned into something its creators never wanted, and how many of the most extravagant warnings about the document were all quickly proven true. And you'll even hear about how authorities bungled multiple chances to stop the deadliest terrorist attack in our country's history and then proceeded to pretend it never happened. These aren't dusty history lessons. They're stories about power, ambition, madness, and the things about Canada that a lot of people would rather ignore. But not you. You won't want to miss an episode. Subscribe to make sure you get all of Season 2 starting March 2026 anywhere you get your podcasts.
Jamil Jivani, Conservative MP for, is it Bowmanville is your riding, Jamil?
Bowmanville, Oshawa North.
Okay, Bowmanville, Oshawa North. So you were down there talking about the GM plant. You were down there talking about auto workers. Let's talk about the other people that you met with. President Trump, that was kind of like a walkthrough. Hi, how you doing, sir? Describe it to me.
Yeah, so JD kind of gave me a tour of the White House, and the president kindly let us interrupt one of his meetings to chat with him for a bit and introduce myself. We had, good conversation, and hopefully it's not the last time that we'll have a chance to speak. But I appreciated him making time to talk to me. Obviously, he's an incredibly busy person. So
he loves the Canadians.
Yes, he did ask me to share that message with with my fellow countrymen, and I kind of took that as him, making the point that however he might feel about our government, it does not reflect on his view of the people of this country, and thought it was if the president asks you to share something, it's probably worth sharing, so I passed it on to everybody on Twitter.
You met with Marco Rubio, Secretary of State. That's just one of his jobs. And if you're online at all, you've seen all the memes of him taking on every other job on the planet. Those are great fun. But Secretary Rubio is one of the most, as an outsider, I would say, appears to be one of the most influential cabinet ministers there. What can you tell us about that chat?
Yeah, we just talked a bit about, I shared my views on CUSMA and the urgency. He had just hosted a critical minerals conference at the State Department right before he and I met. So we talked a bit about critical minerals, what they were, hoping to accomplish at that conference. I learned a bit about the critical minerals agreement that they have done with Mexico, which unfortunately Canada is not part of, and Canada does not have an action plan on that issue with the United States right now. So yeah, just, kind of just catching up on what he's working on. And he's, as you said, has a lot of responsibilities there. So
in terms of discussions with Rubio and Jamieson Greer, who is really, in terms of getting CUSMA settled, one of the key people. Jamieson Greer, for those that don't know the name, United States Trade Representative, he's the lead negotiator. You heard from both of them about Mexico being ahead of Canada. There's been a lot of commentators who are not just reacting to every Truth Social post Trump makes, pointing out that Mexico is ahead of us. You appear to have really gotten that sense when you were in Washington. Are they further ahead than most of us realize in terms of a trade deal compared to Canada?
Well, I think certainly and so the critical minerals issue would be one example, but another one would be both countries have, formally announced CUSMA reform talks, which, as I said about, July 1st being a deadline for the review, it's a bit alarming that two of the three countries in the trade agreement have started, that dialogue, and we have not. So that really stands out to me as something that is a red flag for us. And one of the reasons why it stands out is we've been down this road before. In 2017, when Justin Trudeau was prime minister, Mexico and the United States progressed quite far along without Canada involved in talks, to the point where a bilateral agreement between those two countries was a real possibility. And Canada, sort of at the last minute, had to step in and sort of advocate to be included. Now, I probably don't need to sort of say this, but because it should be obvious, but I'll just, clarify, like, it is not the best situation for your country to be included in an agreement at the last minute. Obviously, the best case scenario is to be part of the dialogue the entire step of the way. And I do worry that we are potentially repeating the mistakes of 2017, where we're being left out. The relationship breakdown has occurred, and then we're going to wind up being shoehorned into an agreement closer to the end of, completion, where, like, at that point, how much of our priorities are going to be in there, and who knows, right? So I'm trying to avoid that, and that's one of the reasons why I bring up the Mexico example, is just to show to Canadians, this is, again, not about taking sides on whether you like the US government or you don't. This is not about elbows up or elbows down. This is about real things happening that are going to affect our economy, and wanting us to be part of those conversations as much as possible.
Look, we all want to diversify trade, but that's going to take a long time. And in the meantime, we've got our biggest trading partner is still the United States. 76% of our exports in 2024 went there. If we don't sign on to a deal, we're in for a world of hurt until we finally start seeing that diversification take place. And if you want an example of how tough it is to diversify our trade away from the United States, when Stephen Harper took office in 2006, we had free trade agreements with that covered 6 countries. By the time he left office in 2015, it was 46 countries. And now we're at 51 countries with a free trade agreement. And still 76% of our trade goes to the United States. So, you can go out and sign more trade agreements, but if you don't actually put in the work to adjust, it's going to take forever. And we're in a bad spot. I want to ask you one last question on your trip to Washington, and that is, did you make any progress? Do you feel like you made any progress? You're going to have, of course, the doubters, but people will say, well, he's not in the government, so could he actually have made any difference, any progress?
Well, I think certainly on the relationship side of things, which is very important, I made tremendous progress. There has not been a Canadian who has had that combination of meetings in a 3-day span, maybe ever, but certainly not in months. So I think we've laid some good foundation for future dialogue. But I will say to the good faith critics, they're correct. I am not able to speak on behalf of the government. I am not the prime minister. I am not a member of his cabinet. So there's only so much I can do without collaboration, which is why my entire message has been, I want to work with Prime Minister Carney. I want to work with Minister LeBlanc. I want to help where I can. I am not able to act on behalf of Canada, surely, but I am able to help. And that's what I believe I accomplished and will continue to work on. And as I said, this is not over. This is not a one-off. I am in this. I am involved. I am going to continue doing everything I can to move the ball forward. And my hope is that instead of it being parallel to the government's efforts, it is in line with the government's efforts. And Brian, I think it would be amazing if I actually got to go down there with Prime Minister Carney and with Minister LeBlanc, and we could go down there to Washington with a unified front. That would be incredible. And I made that offer, and I hope they take me up on it.
Well, when Donald Trump was inaugurated for the second time or around there, Stephen Taylor, conservative commentator, made a comment that I agreed with him on. Any conservative who has gone to CPAC in the last 10 years had more contacts and relationships with the incoming Trump administration than anyone in the Liberal government, elected or bureaucrat. And I would include Ambassador Hillman in that. But they've never reached out and tapped into that, despite offers from yourself and others saying, okay, this is a bipartisan issue, let's deal with it. I think they really missed an opportunity to embrace you and your trip. And you may not like to hear this, but I think they could have used that to their own partisan benefit if they had embraced you and said, look, we're working with conservatives and we're going to Washington and this is how great we are. It may have helped them electorally. But, the collection of clips that played off the top just make it seem petty at how dismissive and insulting they were about you and your trip. Politics is about relationships, and you've got a relationship that they don't have. They should have used that. It's a partial shift of gears, and since we're going to talk about car strategy, I'll embrace the pun. The Carney government has unveiled their car strategy. Your party has been critical of it. As someone that does represent an awful lot of workers at the GM plant, they've taken down one of the shifts. There's still people working at the plant. It's not what it once was, but it's still a significant employer in your region. What's your take on the car strategy, which, despite the fact that the headlines all say they're walking away from the EV mandate, to me, it's just a softening of the EV mandate, and we're still on a push that the marketplace, in my view, will not or does not at this point support.
Yeah, look, I mean, you're right. They won't give up on this EV thing. They say they're walking it back, but then they're putting things in their auto strategy that would really require EV manufacturing in order to meet some of these new standards that they want to introduce. So it is, in effect, an EV mandate. And the reality is, whether you talk to the auto manufacturers, you talk to the unions, you talk to the folks in the local economies in auto towns or historic auto towns, nobody wants this. I mean, it's just the truth of it. Auto mayors across Ontario all signed a letter months ago asking Mark Carney to abandon the EV mandate. The unions have been clear. The manufacturers have been clear. I just don't understand what their fixation is on this EV stuff. Maybe it's ideological. Maybe there's some, political incentive here that I'm not aware of, but I don't see what demand it's meeting from anybody. And, so we're not in support of it. We also believe that a real auto strategy should incentivize purchasing cars made in Canada. And it's one of the reasons why we've been proposing this idea of eliminating the GST on Canadian-made automobiles. I think that's a great idea. I don't understand any resistance to it. I hope they'll accept this proposal because I think it's a really good one. Anything that helps us maintain or grow our auto industry should be our objective. And I don't think the EV stuff helps us at all.
Well, you look at some of the most popular vehicles, and they are made in Canada, whether it's the Chevy Silverado in Oshawa, the Honda Civic in Alliston, the Toyota RAV4, including the hybrid model, made in Cambridge, and you got the Lexus out in Woodstock. These are very popular vehicles, and I think, one of the problems I always had, whether it was the former Wynne government in Ontario or the federal government, offering subsidies for EVs, especially, back before there was even a sense that there'd be any EV industry in Canada, is that we were incentivizing people to buy cars not made here and not do anything to get those cars made here or do anything. It was just like, yeah, let's give people a discount to buy a Porsche Spyder that is an electric vehicle or a high-end Tesla. It made zero sense to me, and they seem to be going back to the future on that. This is very disturbing. But let me ask you about the deal with China, bringing in 49,000, then moving up to 70,000 low-end EVs, low purchase price EVs. I'm told the cars are fantastic, but they are heavily subsidized by the Chinese government. When you look at what's happened in Brazil, when you look at which is a major auto manufacturer, they assemble more cars than we do by far. You look at what's happening in Western Europe, in Brazil, the Chinese come in with small amounts and then quickly take over. I worry that this is going to decimate our existing auto industry.
Yeah, and you're not the only one who worries. Go talk to the guys at the GM plant or any, auto workers across this country, and they share exactly that same concern. I understand that because of the price point, people think, okay, well, this is an alternative. But as you pointed out, Brian, the reason why these vehicles are sold at the price they are is because the Chinese Communist Party subsidizes the manufacturing of these vehicles significantly. Now, you also add on that these vehicles come with a completely distinct technology ecosystem that they are part of, both in terms of their operations, their charging, all of that. You are looking at a disruptive technology that we do not control, that we do not own. And this is a rarity, Brian, but I will give Premier Doug Ford credit for pointing out the national security risks that come from bringing Chinese technology into our country. So this is a mess of a situation on the jobs front, the security front, the economics front. And I will add to anyone championing this trade deal, why aren't we allowed to sell an Oshawa-made Chevy Silverado in China?
I'm sure there would be a market for it.
If we were going to do genuine reciprocity, why is it that they get to sell cars in our country, but we can't sell cars in theirs? Because they understand the strategy here. This is about disrupting an auto industry so that they can have a massive footprint in North America. And I don't like it. I reject it. If I ever have the opportunity to vote in opposition to this trade deal, or God willing, serve in a government that can reverse this agreement, I long for the opportunity to do so because I think this is bad news for Canada.
All right, let's really shift gears and move away from trade, from autos, and talk about your project, Restore the North. You have noted that young men are struggling. And for the longest time, the push was young girls are falling behind, and it was right for us to lift them up. But things have changed, and it would be wrong to say, well, they're boys, they're going to be fine. You've looked at the stats. I've got some of them here in front of me from the letter that you sent to the Prime Minister. I'll just rhyme off a couple. I'll let you do the rest. 71% of opioid deaths in Canada, men. Unemployment among young men reached 22% late last year. Suicide rates, 3 times higher among men, substantially higher for boys in their teens and 20s. Then you've got the whole failure to launch. People are not able to form families, to buy homes because of economic reasons. You look at people matching up, whether it's marriage or dating, things are down. This is very disruptive to society. You're one of the only voices talking about this in Canada. I've heard some people say these are crazy right-wing ideas, crazy right-wing talking points. To that, I would just say that the biggest advocate on this in the United States is a liberal Democrat named Scott Galloway, a professor at NYU with several successful podcasts, including one that just focuses on this. This is a real issue across North America, isn't it? That young men are failing to launch, struggling to find their feet.
Yeah, it's a very serious problem, and the stats you just read, Brian, all come from the government. They come from government data. They come from government reports. So part of what we've been doing is pointing out that the government has all the information required to make this case, to make the case that young men are disproportionately suffering in this economy. Young men are disproportionately suffering from mental health issues and addiction issues. The data is available to the government at their fingertips, and yet they weren't doing anything about it. And our point has been, you should do something about it. All people in this country who suffer deserve help. They deserve attention. They deserve a plan to alleviate their suffering, whatever that plan might look like. And we can debate what the plan should be, but we shouldn't have to debate that a plan should exist. And that has been our point. Now, you're right. We did receive a lot of pushback on this from people who wanted to present this as if it was a zero-sum game. Like, if you're talking about helping men, that means you don't want to help women, which is ridiculous. No one has ever made that argument that I'm aware of. The argument we've been making is that everybody who needs help should get it. And we have been proven correct because even the government has had to acknowledge we were right. You may have seen, Brian, that they have announced, the Minister of Health has announced that they are going to do a national strategy for men's and boys' health, acknowledging that we were right, that there it does require specific and targeted programs, funding, policies to help boys and young men, because boys and young men are different from girls and young women. Now, one of the reasons why it took so long for us to get this to this point is because we have been blinded by this, in my opinion, bizarre ideology that where we were supposed to pretend men and women are the same and boys and girls are the same, and that you can switch around and change your pronouns. And
This might shock you, but we interviewed a doctor on Full Comment a while ago who was telling us about the push to stop treating men and women differently in health outcomes, even though we've spent the last bunch of years realizing things like, women present a heart attack differently than men, so we have to look for it differently, and then we have to treat it differently. And that has led to improved health outcomes. But now the ideological push is, no, you cannot treat them differently. You have to treat them the same.
Yeah.
Well, which treatment
stuff.
do you use then?
Yeah, that's wacky stuff, right? I mean, and this is the thing. It's like, we've been talking about this because we're trying to bring a sense of reality back to the conversation. Our objective is to help people and empower people to have good and healthy lives. And being preoccupied with ideology is not going to get us anywhere. And as I said, the government is now acknowledging we were right. So, I got a phone call from the health minister yesterday to talk about this new strategy. I will do everything I possibly can to support her in putting the best strategy together possible, because this is not about ideology for us. It's not about partisanship. It's about results. And that's what we want to see.
Now, part of what you've been doing is a campus tour. Tell me about that. What have you seen? What have you experienced? And where are you going next?
Well, we've predominantly been in Ontario. We've also had a chance to visit Montreal and Alberta. We will be doing several more provinces in March, and our goal is before the end of this semester to hit all 10 provinces at least once. So we've been very busy, and it's been, frankly, the highlight of my time as a member of parliament. I love speaking to students. I love hearing their perspective. I think there was this kind of stereotype out there that students are super left wing and we're going to go there and we're getting into yelling matches and it just hasn't been the case. We do have disagreements and sometimes things do get combative, but the reality is most students we meet are very practical. They want to be able to get a job and have a life and a career and be successful. And their interest in politics largely comes from wanting to understand how we can set them up to live up to their potential. So the conversations are great. Very rarely do we encounter people who think the status quo is working. Sometimes they want changes to the left, sometimes they want changes to the right, but I think we all agree that change is necessary. And so it makes for a really future-oriented conversation, and I love it. We hear a lot about jobs, immigration. Some people frustrated with the woke stuff on campus. Some people frustrated with a lack of opportunity, wanting to see the private sector growth receive the same attention and prioritization as public sector growth. We get a lot of different, angles on things, but I really enjoy it and I look forward to doing more of these. And one of the coolest things, Brian, is everywhere we've gone, there's always somebody from my home community who is a student there or lives there who shows up. And so I get to meet my own constituents everywhere I go, which is also pretty fun. So,
that would be fun. And you got to turn it around. As you pointed out in your letter to the PM, National Bank of Canada study was titled Canada, No Country for Young Men. We can't have that. We need it to be a country for all young people and for them to thrive. You and my old friend Shuvlo Majumdar have been hitting the road in another way, talking about liberal racism. How dare you? How dare you? You're a conservative. We know that conservatives are all about white supremacy, and you and Shuv are obviously spreading white supremacist talking points. I'm joking, of course. What are you and Shuv doing out there? Is this a comedy routine? Are you having fun pointing out that the folks that are supposed to be trying to help everyone are actually racist? What's this?
Well, the phrase liberal racism grew as a way to describe what, past generations understood as outright discrimination, which now have been repackaged as, DEI or helping people or affirmative action or whatever you want to call it. I am of the belief, call me old school, Brian, but I'm of the belief that if you hire someone based on their race or fire someone based on their race, that's racism. And, that has been the definition of racism for most of the history of this country. It is only recently where what I believe is old bigotries have been reintroduced to public policy as something progressive. I will never accept that as progressive. I reject it outright. And we think it's important to draw attention to that because, if we want to have a cohesive, healthy, identity in this country where people from all backgrounds and cultures and linguistic groups all feel like we are united under one flag, I don't think it should ever be normal for the government to discriminate against people on the basis of their race. So we call that liberal racism because, frankly, it is racism that has been embraced by the Liberal Party. And I think I am an appropriate spokesman against liberal racism, given I did begin my career in politics being called a twofer by then Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. I've encountered...
Hold on, what?
Yeah, I don't know if you remember that whole...
I've forgotten. So
Yeah.
why did he call you a twofer?
He just did a speech talking about my by-election where he just decided to call me a twofer, which in the past has been a slur used against biracial people like myself. Now, whether he intended
your father's black, mother's white.
Yeah. My dad's from Africa. My mom's Irish Scottish. Now, whether he intended to mean it in that way, I can't speak for him, but certainly it got a strong reaction from people.
I'd forgotten about that.
Yeah, I do believe that I have encountered this attitude in the Liberal Party continuously and continue to deal with it as part of my career. And I think it's important for people to call it out. I think when someone looks at you and says, "Bill, because of what you look like or where your parents come from, you could not be hired here. But I'm going to be so generous and offer you this position because you need the extra charity." I think that's a weird way to look at other human beings. And I don't look at people that way, and I don't want to be looked at that way. And that's one of the points we make, because our hope is that one day, like all good causes, we will be successful in overturning some of these racist policies in the federal government.
You and I have known each other about 7 years, and I've never thought about, do I call you a black man, a white man, a biracial man? It's never come up. It's just Jamil.
Yeah.
But I guess if you were to embrace your mother's Irish Scottish heritage and identify as that, there are certain jobs at the federal government you couldn't apply for, whereas if you embrace your father's, you can. That's weird.
That is super weird, right? I mean, my grandpa, Scottish guy, and my dad from Kenya, like two people in the same family applying for a job from the government they both pay taxes to would be treated differently by their own government. That's a weird thing. And we don't think about it that way because we've been sort of presented this idea as if it's so charitable and generous. I don't think it is. I think it's bad news, and I can't wait till we overturn it.
Someone like Shuv, who I've worked with on foreign affairs issues since he was in Iraq and Afghanistan helping set up democracies 20 years ago, one of the smartest guys I know in that field. I can't imagine him finding out that he got a job with the federal government because his family's from Bangladesh and he's brown. I think he would absolutely loathe that idea. because he should get it on his skills.
And I really believe that the majority of people from different racial and cultural backgrounds feel the exact same way. If you tell most people that they didn't earn something, that it's not because of their talents and abilities, but because someone has decided to put them in an identity box, that they got an opportunity, most people don't want to be told that. No, most people don't think that's good. People want to be respected, right? As individuals, respected for their education and their expertise. And I think that's what a fair meritocratic society looks like.
All right, we'll end on this. Early election. It was all the talk of the Conservative Convention. I know you and I were in Calgary for the Conservative Convention, there were apparently talks in Ottawa at the First Ministers' meetings, all the premiers and the PM talking about, is there going to be an early election? We were all talking about it in Calgary. I think the Liberals have set the table to call one if they want to, but not necessarily to call one. What is your thinking on that? Are you getting sign crews going in Bowmanville, Oshawa North?
Well, we routinely, knock doors here so we can be in touch with our constituents. So I'm ready whenever they want to go, and I look forward to it whenever they decide to do it. I personally would rather not have one right now because I think we need to do some work. Elections are these huge distractions that take MPs away from doing their jobs. And I would like to do my job for a little bit longer, at least give me a little bit more time before we go back to the ballot box, just because there's really serious things that need our attention. And I really believe that if Canadians are told between now and July 1st that there's going to be an election, but we have not gotten a trade deal done, I think that should be a huge red flag. Because we should be using every minute we have, every day that we have here to get this sorted out. And the prospect of suspending a really important effort to bring certainty to our economy so that we can go back to the polls, I just don't think that's a great idea. So I would like more time.
But you're in Ottawa talking to Liberal MPs. What's the sense you get? Do you think that they are itching to go to try and get that coveted majority that they couldn't get through floor crossers?
I'll be honest, I don't know. The Liberal MPs I talk to, we mostly focus on the work that we have to do. I'm sure there's a whole bunch who are, focused on elections, but I just couldn't tell you what they think. I don't know. At the end of the day, it'll be one man's decision, right? It'll be the Prime Minister's, and I haven't had the chance to meet with him, so I don't know where his head is at.
And if you did meet with him, you'd rather talk to him about your trip to Washington and give him a briefing on that.
Exactly. And hope that we could both be really excited about trying to get this done and less focused on another election.
All right. And with that, we will leave it there. Jamil Jivani, thanks so much for the time today.
Thank you, Brian. Appreciate you, man.
Full Comment is a Post Media podcast. My name's Brian Lilly, your host. This episode was produced by Andre Prue, theme music by Bryce Hall. Kevin Libin is the executive producer. Please hit the subscribe button, share us on social media, email us to your Aunt May and Whitby, spread the word, let folks know. Thanks for listening. Until next time, I'm Brian Lilly.
There were so many missed opportunities to catch this before the devastating thing happened.
A third of them we found literally in the phone book. These people were not afraid. They knew that nobody was effectively hunting them. They knew they had escaped justice, that they were going to die in their beds.
When I give talks at law schools, is that the charter ultimately is empowering a minority, and it's empowering a minority that's a guild across the country. And it's a fairly elite guild, and the guild is lawyers.
Families who were split by referendum and brothers and sisters who never talked to each other for years after the referendum because they were so angry at each other because of emotions on both sides.
The reason he was assassinated was not because he was trying to put a satellite into space, but because the gun that he was creating had other applications that made him and the gun very dangerous.
It's finally here. A new season of Canada Did What? Post Media podcast that revisits the big Canadian political events you might think you remember and tells you the real story you never knew. I'm Tristan Hopper. The voices you just heard are from our brand new Season 2. we will unpack some of the pivotal moments that helped define our country, often without a vote, usually without a plan, and sometimes without anyone admitting what they'd done. We'll find out how Canada became a welcoming paradise for untold numbers of Nazi war criminals after the Second World War. We let them build monuments to their wartime exploits and even ended up honoring a Nazi fighter in the House of Commons. And I'm sorry to say that none of that happened by accident. We'll bring you the little-known story of a troubled Canadian rocket scientist who turned to a sinister life of selling giant guns to terrible people. And if that sounds like a spy novel, it ends like one too. You'll hear the behind-the-scenes story of Quebec's attempted secession from Canada and how very close we came to a political crisis that would have made Brexit look like a picnic. You'll hear about how the much-celebrated Charter of Rights and Freedoms turned into something its creators never wanted, and how many of the most extravagant warnings about the document were all quickly proven true. And you'll even hear about how authorities bungled multiple chances to stop the deadliest terrorist attack in our country's history, and then proceeded to pretend it never happened. These aren't dusty history lessons. They're stories about power, ambition, madness, and the things about Canada that a lot of people would rather ignore. But not you. You won't want to miss an episode. Subscribe to make sure you get all of Season 2 starting March 2026, anywhere you get your podcasts.